I'm Simon Durkin, Head of Real Assets Research and Strategy in Europe for BlackRock. Now, real estate accounts for 40% of global greenhouse gas emissions, but when considered in the context of urban areas, real estate actually contributes a significantly higher amount, closer probably to 60%. So I don't think it's discretionary for real estate to play an increasingly large role in the decarbonisation of cities, particularly if cities and governments are serious about meeting their net zero carbon targets. But there are challenges, and now more challenges today than there were pre-pandemic, and certainly more challenges now than there were pre the war in Ukraine. But the overarching conditions are being set by governments primarily through regulation. However, the key driver for landlords and investors has to start with the fundamental belief that climate risk equals investment risk. And we're seeing this play out in the market today as occupiers and investors become more selective in their occupation and ownership of buildings, which dictates value. Now, understanding the link between climate risk and investment risk provides the context for integrating climate and ESG risks more generally into asset business plans, but importantly into real estate investment strategies. So supporting this will also be the valuation community, and they will be absolutely critical in helping us understand on a forward basis what the climate transition impacts are for income and liquidity risks around the valuation of assets going forward. So I think the biggest challenge facing not just UK real estate, but global real estate today is without question the macroeconomic environment and the increase in geopolitical risk. We're coming off the back of an extended period of low volatility in both inflation and interest rates and output. But that period is now clearly over, and we're now in a world of increased uncertainty. We're in a new regime with unprecedented production constraints driving inflation and elevated levels of debt at risk from higher interest rates and increasing politicization. Now, central banks face a stark choice, either to destroy growth, to squeeze out inflation by raising interest rates, or to live with inflation for longer. The pandemic actually sparked this massive shift in consumer spend to goods away from services when lockdowns limited production and movement. Then the restart of economic activity released pent-up demand for services, creating tight labour markets that we see today. And now the war in Ukraine has added an additional supply shock, pushing up commodity and energy prices to an almost 40-year high. So what does this mean for real estate? Well, this translates into elevated construction cost inflation and rising interest rates, increasing the cost of debt that is so fundamental to the efficient operation of the real estate market. And on the other hand, we also have the spectre of rising interest rates squeezing growth and consumption. Now, let's be honest, Western economies rely on consumer spending to drive economic growth, and a slowdown in consumption leads to a slowdown in production and business investment, leading to a slowdown in demand for real estate. Now, the pandemic has accelerated a whole range of structural shifts, which add yet another layer of complexity to the market. To quote some examples, what will the future demand for office space look like? Will the growth in online spend that we saw during the pandemic continue at the same rate at the expense of bricks and mortar retail and continue to favour logistics? How will the deglobalisation of operations and supply chains impact real estate demand? And how will the acceleration in the climate emergency be tackled by the real estate industry? However, whereby the cycle is undoubtedly different this time, it does share similarities with other cycles in that dislocation creates opportunity. Now, if we were to take collective action today that will make a big impact to achieving net carbon zero, what might that be? Well, I'd have to say it's around the sharing of knowledge and data and in particular, sharing data between tenants and landlords. And with that increased collaboration, hopefully we would see more of a collective ownership of the problem. After all, it has to be seen as a shared problem with a solution in which we all share in the benefits. So ultimately, there needs to be greater industry knowledge and data sharing in order for us to measure what's working and, importantly, what's not working. So what's measured can't be managed just couldn't be more true in this situation. Now, there's also a practical yet seldom discussed issue here relating to real estate fund performance measurement, which is generally valuation or appraisal based. Now, this means a capex taken today that moves an asset from, say, an EPC rating of E to a C would be penalised by index measurement protocols unless it's directly associated with an increase in rental income or an immediate increase in valuation. Now, why is this relevant? Well, this might encourage some managers to kick the can down the line in favour of maximising short-term performance, until, of course, valuers are factoring in the future resilience of capital value attributable to transitional capital expenditure and the vulnerability of future rental income. And to my knowledge, that's not quite happening yet. Historically, physical climate risk has very much been a peripheral concern, I would say, for real estate investors, but has now probably risen, if not at the top, very near the top of the agenda, and maybe more so in some regions than others. Think about physical climate risks. These include extreme weather events and typically lead to increased insurance premiums, higher expenditure, increased operational costs, reducing NOI, decreasing liquidity, and leading to an ultimate diminution in the capital value. So it really matters. Investors have recently made net zero commitments, regulators have developed reporting standards, governments have passed laws and regulations targeting emissions, employees are demanding action, and hence tenants are demanding more sustainable buildings. But at the same time, the accelerating physical consequence of a changing climate are becoming more pronounced as we see a greater incidence of storms, floods, fires, extreme heat, and other risks. So I would say that the impact of increasing physical risk on value and income simply can't be ignored. And data, yet again, is key to helping us first understand the risk before we can then plan how to deal with it. Now, at BlackRock, we are implementing an assessment of relative resilience in our due diligence and decision-making process, leveraging BlackRock's Aladdin climate tool. And this is helping us to systematically understand and assess physical climate risk and plan our responses accordingly. So to summarise, I would say that not understanding physical climate risk is not understanding investment risk. Transitional risk sits alongside physical risk and helps us understand how we transition ourselves to a greener economy whilst taking into account the real issues that we face today as a result of the physical risks. Now, transitional risks associated with moving from a high to a lower carbon consumption not just has an immediate impact on investors, but also has a longer term strategic relevance for real estate investors as they think through the longer term strategic implications for future real estate activity. But as we see the low carbon energy transition accelerate, there's now a real risk of assets becoming stranded in that transition and experiencing significant value write-downs of assets that fail to meet market expectations and regulatory requirements. But again, the valuation community is key to helping us quantify this risk. So just to give you an example, in the UK government net zero strategy of 2021 increases the minimum energy performance standards requirement for the letting of commercial property to a B from the current minimum of an E by 2030 with interim milestones. Now, this means today an estimated 76% of London office stock would no longer be commercially transactable or lettable, as it would not meet the minimum EPC requirement of B. Now, that's a phenomenal figure, that underscores the need to act now, but also highlights the impact of commodity inflation and the lack of availability of resources to deal with the transition. So that's probably the biggest risk to acting today. Now, as market appetite for sustainable real estate only grows, this creates opportunities for us as investors. We have to think differently, though, as to how we consider real estate markets an opportunity. But the demand and availability gap is simply widening, and that's presenting a huge opportunity for real estate investors to directly benefit from the repositioning of older, inefficient office stock, while also decarbonising and future-proofing their portfolios. Now, the International Energy Agency estimated that almost 70% of buildings standing in 2050 are actually standing today. Now, what does that mean? Well, that means that we cannot simply develop our way to net zero, but we have to embrace the opportunity to retrofit and refurbish assets to be in line with the transition and aligned with the increasing demand from occupiers and investors. But again, we need to consider the inflationary effects of what this actually means, because at present, there simply is not sufficient raw materials, labour, expertise or consultants in the industry in the UK. And with some landlords not acting today, the need will only increase and drive inflation even further. So with steepening depreciation curves rendering more assets stranded, the investable universe of sustainable stock will only likely reduce in the short term. But going back to our initial point that real estate accounts for almost 60% of carbon emissions in urban centres, and if cities are to meet their own net zero carbon targets, a collective effort between owners, occupiers and the public sector really needs to mobilise now. And finally, a word on the green premium. Now, the debate around the green premium has been rumbling for years. Now, whether sustainability-focused occupiers pay a higher rent or pay a value premium to secure buildings with the highest sustainability credentials, it is a bit of a moot point, and a large number of studies have been launched to try and understand more about this premium. Now, in 2018, an analysis of 42 studies on the topic concluded that the green premium averaged circa 6% of rent and 8% of sales premium. However, what we've noticed since is the tone of the conversation around the issue is changing more towards the long-term preservation of value rather than generating an immediate return premium. Now, the speed at which the green premium becomes more observable will also depend on a number of factors, most notably how quickly legislation tightens, because this will lead to a clearer polarisation of assets and the potential for the emergence of the brown discount for assets that need to be recapitalised or retrofit in order to achieve the correct sustainability ratings and continue to attract tenants and offer liquidity. So in reality, we'll see both the green premium and the brown discount combine to accelerate the dispersion between the best and the less desirable assets. And with an understanding of how structural changes will impact demand in certain locations, opportunities for astute stock selection will most certainly emerge.